The rain poured mercilessly that night, turning the city streets into rushing rivers. 17-year-old Andre huddled beneath the small awning of a closed shop, his thin jacket offering little protection against the biting cold. 6 months on, the streets had taught him to find shelter wherever he could, to become invisible when necessary, and to keep moving when staying put became dangerous. Andre pulled his backpack closer. Everything he owned was inside. A change of clothes, a dog-eared library book, and half a sandwich saved from the community center. The downtown lights flickered in the distance, a reminder of a world that seemed to have forgotten him ever since his grandmother passed and the foster placement fell through. He was about to relocate to the bus station for the night when he heard it. A pained cry cutting through the drumming of rain. At first he thought it might be a cat, but then came words. "Help! Please, someone!" The voice came from the parking lot across the street. Andre hesitated. Getting involved in other people's problems rarely ended well for someone like him. But something in that voice, raw fear, pulled him forward. Splashing through puddles, he found a luxury car with its hazard lights blinking. A woman leaned against it, doubled over in pain, one hand pressed against her very pregnant belly, the other clutching her phone. "My car broke down," she gasped when she saw him. "And my phone died, She winced, breathing rapidly. "I think the baby's coming early." Andre approached cautiously. The woman wore expensive clothes, a cashmere coat now soaked with rain, designer boots, a watch that probably cost more than any home he'd ever lived in. People like her usually crossed the street when they saw people like him approaching. "Should I try to flag down another car?" he asked, glancing toward the nearly empty street. "I've been trying," she said. "Nobody stops in this weather. Please, I need to get to Memorial Hospital. It's not far, but I can't walk and—" Another contraction hit, making her words dissolve into a groan. Making a quick decision, Andre shrugged off his backpack and offered his arm. "I know a shortcut through the park. If you can walk a little, I can help you there faster than waiting for someone else." The woman studied his face, calculation and desperation warring in her eyes. Finally, necessity won out. "Okay," she whispered. "I'm Andre," he said, supporting her weight as they started moving. "Eliza," she replied through clenched teeth. The journey was slow and difficult. The rain continued to fall as Andre guided Eliza through the dark park, taking narrow paths he knew by heart. He told her stories to distract her from the pain, about the night sky, about the city history he'd learned at the library, about the time he'd found a kitten and helped it find a home even when he didn't have one himself. When Eliza needed to stop and breathe through contractions, Andre held her hand and counted seconds, something he remembered his grandmother doing for a neighbor once. He gave her his jacket despite her protests, ignoring how the cold rain soaked through his thin t-shirt. "Why are you helping me?" she asked during one brief rest. "You don't know me. Most people wouldn't stop." Andre shrugged. "My grandma always said we're put on this earth to help each other through the hard times. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. Pain feels the same for everybody." Eliza's eyes filled with tears that mingled with the rain. "Where is your grandmother now?" "She passed last year. Cancer." Andre helped her stand again. "We're almost there, just a little farther." By the time they reached the emergency entrance of Memorial Hospital, Eliza could barely walk. Andre called for help, and suddenly they were surrounded by medical staff who whisked her away on a wheelchair. In the chaos, Andre stepped back, his job done. His backpack was still at the spot where they'd met, and he needed to retrieve it before someone else did. As he turned to leave, Eliza called out, "Wait, please don't go." Andre hesitated, but a security guard was already eyeing him suspiciously. A soaking wet, shivering black teenager in a hospital lobby. He gave Eliza a small smile and slipped back into the rainy night. The next morning, Andre woke beneath the concrete bridge where he sometimes stayed. His backpack was gone along with everything he owned. He closed his eyes, trying to push down the wave of despair. At least the woman and her baby were safe. That had to count for something. He made his way to the community center where he sometimes got breakfast and a chance to shower. As he approached the building, he noticed an unusual number of people milling about, including a news van. "There he is," someone shouted, and suddenly people were rushing toward him, cameras flashing. Andre backed away, confused and frightened, but a familiar voice cut through the commotion. "Andre." Eliza pushed through the crowd, looking remarkably composed for someone who had given birth just hours ago. Behind her stood a tall man in an impeccable suit, his expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "We've been looking everywhere for you," Eliza said, reaching for his hand. The story spilled out as they moved inside the community center, away from the growing crowd. The luxury car Andre had found Eliza beside wasn't just any car. It belonged to her husband Thomas, the founder of the country's largest tech company and a billionaire many times over. They'd been frantically searching for Andre since last night, wanting to thank the young man who had helped bring their daughter safely into the world. "The doctor said if I hadn't reached the hospital when I did, there could have been serious complications," Eliza explained. "You saved 2 lives last night." Andre shifted uncomfortably under their grateful gazes. "Anyone would have helped. But they didn't," Thomas said quietly. "We have security camera footage from nearby buildings. 17 people passed by my wife while she was calling for help. You were the only one who stopped." The community center director, who had known Andre since he first became homeless, stood nearby with tears in her eyes. "I lost my backpack," Andre said, not knowing what else to say. "I left it when I helped you." Thomas smiled. "We can replace a backpack. What we can't replace is what you gave us, your kindness, your courage. We want to help you if you'll let us." Andre looked between them, suspicion warring with hope. People had made promises before, only to disappear when things got complicated. "Our daughter was born at 3:17 this morning," Eliza said softly. "We named her Hope, because that's what you gave us when you appeared out of the darkness. Now we want to return that gift." "I don't need charity," Andre said, though his empty stomach and wet clothes argued otherwise. "This isn't charity," Thomas replied. "This is an investment in someone who has already proven his character, someone our family now owes a debt to." As the rain began again outside, Andre listened to their proposal: a place to live, education, a job if he wanted it. Second chances didn't come often in his world. But sitting there, watching the genuine emotion in their eyes, he allowed himself to believe this one might be real. Little did Andre know that this rainy night encounter would change not just his life, but would ripple outward, touching countless others. The story of the homeless teen and the billionaire's wife was just beginning, and the city would never quite be the same. What none of them realized yet was that Andre's simple act of kindness would spark a movement bigger than any of them could imagine. Thomas, inspired by what had happened, would soon launch a foundation focused on youth homelessness. Eliza, forever changed by her experience, would become a fierce advocate for community support systems. And Andre, who had only wanted to help a woman in distress, would find himself at the center of a story about human connection that crossed all boundaries of wealth and circumstance. But that night, as they sat in the quiet community center while rain drummed against the windows, it was just 3 people beginning to understand that sometimes the most powerful moments in life come when we least expect them, when we choose compassion over indifference, when we reach across the divides that separate us, when we see each other not as categories or stereotypes, but simply as humans in need of connection. Outside, the city continued its busy rhythm, unaware that within its streets a small miracle of human kindness had changed everything for a forgotten young man and a wealthy couple who had never imagined their lives would intersect in such a profound way. 3 months passed since that rainy night. Andre sat nervously in the waiting area of Thomas's company headquarters, his reflection barely recognizable in the polished marble floor. Gone were the worn-out sneakers and tattered jeans, replaced with new clothes that still felt strange against his skin. His hair was neatly trimmed, and the constant hunger that had been his companion for months was finally gone. "He's ready for you now," said the assistant with a warm smile. Everyone here treated him with a respect he was still getting used to. Andre entered Thomas's office, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thomas stood up from behind his desk, genuine pleasure lighting his face. There he is, the man of the hour. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. How's the apartment working out? The apartment? Andre still couldn't believe it was his. A small but modern one-bedroom in a safe building, with a real bed and a refrigerator that was actually full of food. It's great, Andre said. I keep thinking I'll wake up back under the bridge. Thomas's expression softened. I understand. Big changes take time to feel real. He paused. Eliza wanted me to remind you about dinner on Sunday. Hope gets fussy if she doesn't see her favorite person at least once a week. Andre smiled at the mention of the baby. Somehow the tiny girl had wrapped her fingers around his heart from the first time Eliza had placed her in his arms at the hospital. I'll be there. Good. Now let's discuss your future. Thomas slid a folder across the desk. Your GED instructor says you're progressing faster than anyone she's worked with. At this rate, you'll be ready for the test next month. Andre nodded, pride warming his chest. The hours of study were paying off. And after that? Thomas continued. College is definitely an option. Any thoughts? Andre hesitated. In the foster system, he'd learned not to dream too big, but these past months had shown him that sometimes the impossible happened anyway. I've been thinking about social work, he said finally. Or maybe something in community development. I know what it's like out there. Maybe I could help change things. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I think you'd be exceptional at that. As they discussed possibilities, Andre's phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Don't let him keep you all day. The community center called. They need your help with the new youth program. Andre smiled. Despite their wealth and status, Thomas and Eliza had become something he hadn't expected. Real friends. Not saviors or benefactors, but people who genuinely valued his perspective and company. The community center had changed too. What began as Thomas writing a check had evolved into something more meaningful. After listening to Andre's experiences and ideas, Thomas had funded a comprehensive program for homeless youth with Andre as a key advisor. You should go, Thomas said, noticing the text. The center matters more than this meeting. We can finish up tomorrow. Outside, the city looked different to Andre now. Not because he had more money or security, though those things helped. It looked different because he had a place in it, a purpose beyond just surviving. At the community center, a group of teens looked up as he entered. Some had been friends during his time on the streets. Others were new faces. All of them knew his story now. It had been on the news, on social media, everywhere. He'd hated the attention at first, but had come to recognize its power when he saw how it opened doors and wallets for the center. Andre, called out Deshawn, a 16-year-old who reminded Andre painfully of himself. They're saying the new shelter building might be ready by winter. Is it true? That's the plan, Andre confirmed, settling in among them. 20 beds, private showers, computer lab, and job counseling, and no curfew that forces people to choose between a bed and a late-night job. A girl named Zoe looked skeptical. And rich people are just giving money for this? Why now? We've been here all along. It was a fair question, one Andre had asked himself many times. Sometimes people need to see a problem through a story they can connect with, he explained. Our story, mine and Eliza's, made people pay attention. But they're not just helping because of me. They're helping because they finally see you too. Later that evening, Andre walked through the park where he'd helped Eliza that rainy night. The path was easier to navigate now, with new lighting Thomas had quietly funded for the city. Small changes that made big differences. His phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen from the corner store where he'd sometimes begged for food. After the news stories broke, she'd tracked him down. Andre, my grandson got the scholarship, she exclaimed without preamble. The one from Thomas's foundation that you told us about. 4 years full ride. Andre grinned. Mrs. Chen had always slipped him extra food even when she could barely keep her store running. Her grandson was brilliant but had been planning to skip college to help with the family business. That's fantastic. He deserves it. You made this happen, she insisted. You connected us. We wouldn't have known otherwise. This was happening more and more, Andre becoming a bridge between worlds that rarely intersected. People from his old life reached out when they needed help navigating systems designed to exclude them. And people from Thomas and Eliza's world sought his insights on how their money and influence might actually make a difference. The sun was setting as he reached Eliza and Thomas's home, not the massive mansion he'd expected, but a beautiful brownstone on a tree-lined street. He rang the bell, hearing Hope's delighted squeal from inside. Eliza opened the door with the baby on her hip. Hope immediately reached for Andre, her tiny face lighting up. "There's my favorite girl," he said, taking her into his arms. Inside, the aroma of cooking filled the warm space. Thomas stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring something that smelled amazing. "Just in time," he called. "Dinner's almost ready." These Sunday dinners had become a tradition. Sometimes others joined them, community leaders, politicians. Thomas was lobbying for policy changes, young people from the center. Tonight it was just the four of them. As they ate, Eliza shared news about the hospital project she'd started, a new wing dedicated to maternal care for underserved women, inspired by her own experience. "The board approved the funding today," she said. "Construction starts next month." "That's not all," Thomas added, glancing at Andre. "Tell him about the documentary." Eliza smiled. "A filmmaker wants to tell our story, how that night changed all our lives and what's grown from it. They want to focus on the ripple effects throughout the community." Andre set down his fork. "I don't know about being on camera. The news stuff was bad enough." "That's exactly why we need your voice," Thomas said gently. "Not just our perspective as the people with money. The real story is how one moment of human connection can transform not just individuals, but entire systems." Hope babbled happily from her high chair, reaching for Andre again. He picked her up, marveling as always at how this tiny human had no idea that their worlds weren't supposed to have crossed. "The filmmaker wants to interview everyone," Eliza continued. Deshawn and the others at the center, Mrs. Chen and her grandson, the doctors who delivered Hope, the people moving into the new housing units. "It's not just about us. It's about how change actually happens." Andre thought about it as Hope played with his fingers. His grandmother had always told him that his life would mean something important someday. He'd stopped believing that during those cold months on the street, but maybe she'd been right after all. "I'll think about it," he promised. Later, after, Hope had fallen asleep against his chest and been tucked into her crib. The three adults stood on the rooftop garden of the brownstone. The city lights sparkled around them, a mosaic of countless lives and stories. "I got a letter from my old foster family today," Andre said suddenly. "They saw me on the news, wanted to reconnect." Thomas and Eliza exchanged glances but said nothing, giving him space to process this. "They said they're sorry for how things ended, that they were going through their own stuff and couldn't handle a teenager." He looked out at the city. "I'm not sure how I feel about it." "You don't have to decide right now," Eliza said softly. "Or ever if you don't want to." Andre nodded. "I know, but I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately. About second chances." He smiled slightly. "Seems like I'm getting pretty good at those." A cool breeze swept across the rooftop, carrying the sense of the city, food from restaurants, flowers from the park, the faint tang of rain in the distance. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Andre admitted. "From that night in the rain to now." Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. "The remarkable thing isn't how much has changed. It's how much was possible all along, if we just saw each other as people first." Below them, the city continued its endless rhythm. Somewhere, another teenager was facing a night on the streets. Another expectant mother was worried about the future. Another person of wealth was insulated from the realities just blocks from their home. But somewhere else, inspired by the story that had begun to spread, someone was stopping to help rather than walking past. Someone was opening a door that had previously been closed. Someone was recognizing humanity across the lines that too often divided. And in that moment, standing between the two people who had become his unlikely family, Andre understood something his grandmother had tried to tell him long ago. That sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money or status or power. It's the simple, earth-shaking decision to see someone else's need and say, "I'm here. I'll help." The city lights blurred slightly as Andre's eyes filled with unexpected tears. Not of sadness or even gratitude, but of determination. Because this story, their story, was still being written, and the next chapter was just beginning. 1 year later, Andre stood before a packed auditorium, his heart pounding against his ribs. The documentary about their story had premiered last night to a standing ovation. Now came the harder part, speaking to this crowd of influential people who could actually implement the changes he'd been fighting for. "I never planned to become the face of anything," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I was just trying to survive another night on the streets when I heard someone calling for help." From the front row, Eliza smiled encouragingly, bouncing little hope on her lap. At 18 months old, the toddler was a bundle of energy with her mother's eyes and a smile that could melt the coldest heart. "People keep calling what happened a miracle," Andre continued. "Rich and poor crossing paths, lives changing forever. But here's the truth. The real miracle would be if such connections weren't so rare that they make headlines." A murmur moved through the audience. These were people who wrote big checks to charities but rarely entered the neighborhoods their money was meant to help. The night I met Eliza, I'd been turned away from 3 shelters already. They were all full. I'd applied for 14 jobs that week, but without an address or phone, nobody called back. I'd tried to get help from 6 different agencies, but without ID, which had been stolen at another shelter, I didn't qualify. He paused, meeting the eyes of the city council members in the second row. "Those aren't just inconveniences. They're systems that keep people trapped, and they're systems we can change." Behind him, a screen displayed images from the past year. The new youth shelter opening, Andre receiving his GED certificate, Deshawn getting accepted to community college, the maternal care wing at the hospital treating its first patients. "This isn't a story about charity," Andre emphasized. "It's a story about removing barriers so people can build their own lives. It's about changing systems, not just individual circumstances." Thomas stood up next, joining Andre at the podium. Over the months, their relationship had evolved into a true partnership. Thomas had the resources and connections. Andre had the lived experience and vision. 1 year ago, Thomas said, "I was just another wealthy businessman who thought writing checks was enough. I knew about homelessness as a concept, not as the reality faced by actual people with names and dreams and potential." He looked at Andre with genuine respect. Meeting Andre didn't just change his life. It completely transformed mine and Eliza's. It showed us that the barriers between people aren't natural, they're constructed, and what's constructed can be dismantled. As they outlined their ambitious 5-year plan, a comprehensive approach to youth homelessness that included housing, education, healthcare, and employment. Andre spotted familiar faces throughout the audience. Mrs. Chen and her grandson, now finishing his freshman year of college. Deshawn and 5 other youth from the center, all in new clothes donated for the occasion. His GED teacher, the doctor who had delivered hope. "This isn't about one night in the rain anymore," Andre concluded. "It's about what happens next. It's about creating a city where a 17-year-old doesn't end up on the streets in the first place." The standing ovation that followed was deafening. Afterward, at the reception, Andre found himself surrounded by people wanting to talk, to help, to be part of what was happening. It still felt surreal, this new world where people actually listened to him, where his words carried weight. "Andre," called a voice he hadn't heard in years. He turned to see Mr. Wilson, his middle school history teacher, pushing through the crowd. "I always knew you were special," the older man said, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Even back then, the way you looked out for other kids, the way you thought about big questions. I tried to find you after your grandmother passed, but you'd already disappeared into the system." Andre swallowed hard. Mr. Wilson had been the first person to tell him he was smart, to suggest he could go to college someday. "I'm starting at State University in the fall," Andre told him. "Social policy major." Mr. Wilson beamed. "Of course you are. You're going to change everything, aren't you?" Before Andre could answer, a small tornado crashed into his legs, Hope having escaped from her mother, giggling as she wrapped herself around his knees. "Up!" she demanded, raising her arms. "Andre, up!" He swung her onto his hip automatically, a move that had become second nature. The toddler immediately started playing with the button on his new suit jacket, completely unimpressed by the important people surrounding them. Eliza appeared, slightly breathless. "Sorry, she moves like lightning these days." She nodded respectfully to Mr. Wilson as Andre made introductions. Watching them talk, his past and present converging, Andre felt a strange sense of completion, circles closing, new ones beginning. Later that night, he walked through his old neighborhood. The documentary team followed at a respectful distance, filming this epilogue to their story. The streets looked different now, not just because of the physical improvements their foundation had funded, but because Andre himself saw them differently. He stopped at the corner where he'd once begged for change. A young man sat there now, a cardboard sign propped beside him. Andre approached slowly, crouched down to eye level. "Hey there, I'm Andre." The young man looked up warily. "I know who you are. Seen you on the news. What's your name?" "Lee." "You hungry, Lee?" A shrug. "Always." Andre nodded toward a diner across the street. "Let me buy you dinner? No strings attached, just food and conversation." Lee studied him, suspicion warring with hunger. "Why?" "Because someone once stopped for me when nobody else would," Andre said simply. Changed everything. Inside the diner, over burgers and fries, Lee's story spilled out. Different circumstances from Andre's, but the same systemic failures, the same sense of invisibility. "I saw that documentary poster," Lee admitted, "about you and that rich family. Sounds like a fairy tale." Andre smiled slightly. "Parts of it were, but most of it was hard work. Still is." He pulled out his phone, pulled up the application for their new transitional housing program. "We have 3 spots opening next week, no waiting list, no mountain of paperwork, just a place to start." Lee stared at the phone. "Why me? There's hundreds of people out there." "Because you're the one I met tonight," Andre said. "That's how change happens. One person at a time until the systems themselves transform." Outside, the city had changed into its nighttime clothes, streetlights glowing, windows illuminated, the rhythm slowing but never quite stopping. Thomas and Eliza waited by the car, Hope asleep in her father's arms. They'd offered to drive Lee to the intake center, where he could shower and sleep in a real bed tonight. As they drove through streets that had once seemed so hopeless to Andre, he thought about circles again, about how one moment of connection had spiraled outward, touching life after life. The foundation they'd established wasn't perfect. The systems they were fighting to change were deeply entrenched. Some days, the task seemed impossible. But then there were moments like this, one person reaching out to another, a chain reaction of humanity that reminded him why it all mattered. Hope stirred in her car seat, opening sleepy eyes. "Andre," she murmured, reaching for his hand with complete trust. Beside him, Lee watched the exchange with curiosity, perhaps seeing for the first time that different worlds really could connect. "You know what's weird?" Lee said suddenly. "I almost didn't stay on that corner tonight. Something told me to move on, try another spot. But then I thought, what's the point? Nobody really sees us anyway." "I'm glad you stayed," Andre said quietly. "Yeah," Lee replied, looking out at the city passing by. "Me too." Thomas caught Andre's eye in the rearview mirror, a look of understanding passing between them. This was how it had started with them too. One human recognizing another, refusing to look away. As they pulled up to the intake center, a renovated hotel now serving as transitional housing, Andre felt the familiar mix of emotions. Satisfaction, at what they'd accomplished, frustration at how much remained undone, hope for what might still be possible. "This is just the beginning," he told Lee as they walked inside. "It gets better from here." The documentary crew filmed from a distance as Lee was welcomed, as he realized this place had real beds and private bathrooms, as the intake coordinator treated him with dignity instead of suspicion. "We'll continue his story in the follow-up film," the director told Andre. "If he's willing." "That's his choice," Andre replied. "Everyone deserves to control their own story." Outside again, Andre stood with Thomas, Eliza, and the sleeping Hope, as the night wrapped around them like a blanket. "1 year," Thomas mused. "Sometimes it feels like that night in the rain was yesterday. Other times it seems like another lifetime." Eliza leaned against her husband. "It was another lifetime, for all of us." Andre looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights. His grandmother had taught him their names, told him stories about how people throughout history had used them for guidance. "She was right all along," he said softly. "Who was?" Eliza asked. "My grandmother. She always said we're not put on this earth by accident, that our purpose is to be a light for each other through the dark times." He smiled. "I thought those were just nice words. I didn't understand she was giving me a map." Hope sighed in her sleep, her small hand still clutching Andre's finger. In her innocent grip, he felt the future. Not just his own, but all the lives. They would touch together, all the systems they would change, all the barriers they would dismantle. One connection at a time, one story that led to another. One moment of seeing another human being, really seeing them, and reaching out a hand. The rain had stopped long ago, but the ripples continued to spread. 5 years had passed since that rainy night. Andre stood at the podium, adjusted his tie, and looked out at the sea of faces. At 23, he still felt too young to be addressing the National Conference on Urban Poverty, but the audience didn't seem to share his doubts. They leaned forward, eager to hear from the young man whose story had sparked a movement that was reshaping cities across the country. "When I was 17 and sleeping under bridges," Andre began, "I never imagined I'd be here today. I never imagined I'd finish college or help create programs that have housed over 5,000 young people. And I definitely never imagined that little girl over there would call me Uncle Andre." He pointed to where Hope sat between Thomas and Eliza, now a spirited 6-year-old with bright eyes and untamable curls. She waved excitedly when she heard her name, making the audience chuckle. "But that's the thing about life," Andre continued. "Sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest possibilities. Sometimes a random encounter in the rain becomes the thing that changes everything." The documentary about their story had won awards and been viewed millions of times online. More importantly, it had inspired action, legislation changes, funding, initiatives, new approaches to issues that had seemed unsolvable. "Today I want to talk about what we've learned over these 5 years," Andre said, clicking to the first slide of his presentation. "About what works and what doesn't when addressing homelessness. About how to create change that lasts beyond the headlines." The presentation was compelling, full of data but also full of faces. Deshawn, now a college graduate working as a youth counselor. Lee, who had gone from that street corner to managing one of their housing facilities. Mrs. Chen's grandson, who had created a free app connecting people to resources in their neighborhoods. The solutions were always there, Andre emphasized. The brilliant minds and willing hearts were always there. What was missing was the connection between worlds that rarely intersect, and the resources to bring good ideas to life. In the front row, Thomas nodded. Their partnership had deepened over the years, evolving as Andre grew from a teenager needing help to a respected colleague with his own vision and expertise. Thomas had taught Andre about business and politics. Andre had taught Thomas about reality on the ground and what actually worked. 5 years ago, I told an audience that the real miracle would be if such connections weren't so rare, Andre said. Today, I'm proud to say they're becoming less rare every day. He clicked to a map showing their program's expansion to 12 cities. In each location, They paired people of means with people of experience, creating teams that could actually solve problems instead of just talking about them. This isn't charity, Andre said firmly. This is investment in human potential. This is removing artificial barriers so people can build their own futures. After the standing ovation and the Q&A session, Andre made his way through well-wishers to where Hope was waiting impatiently, bouncing on her toes. "Uncle Andre, did you see me? I sat still the whole time," she declared proudly, launching herself into his arms. "You were amazing," he assured her, swinging her up. "The best audience member by far." Hope beamed. "Daddy says we're going to the big dinner now, and then ice cream after." "Ice cream is definitely required after such good behavior," Andre agreed seriously. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Outstanding presentation. The housing secretary was impressed. I think we'll get the funding expansion." Eliza hugged him. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered. The mention of his grandmother sent a wave of emotion through Andre. He wished she could have seen all this, how far he'd come, how many lives they were changing. But in a way, she was present in everything he did, her wisdom guiding him still. At the formal dinner that evening, Andre found himself seated next to the mayor of a major city interested in adopting their program. As they discussed implementation details, Andre noticed a server hovering nearby, listening intently while pretending to refill water glasses. When the mayor excused himself to greet another guest, Andre turned to the young woman. "You seem interested in our work," she startled, nearly spilling the water. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop." "It's okay," Andre smiled. "I'm Andre." "I know who you are," she said, then added more quietly. "I saw your documentary. 3 times, actually." Something in her eyes, a familiar wariness mixed with hope, made Andre pay closer attention. "What's your name?" "Tasha." "Nice to meet you, Tasha. Are you working here full-time?" She shook her head. "Part-time. 3 jobs, actually. Trying to save up for college." Andre pulled out a business card. "Our foundation offers scholarships. No complicated application process, no minimum GPA requirement. Just people who want to learn and grow." Tasha stared at the card. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." The echo of his own words to Thomas and Eliza years ago wasn't lost on Andre. "Because connections matter. Because everyone deserves a chance. And because someone once helped me when they didn't know me either." Later, as they left the venue, Andre spotted Tasha talking to Eliza, both of them deep in conversation. Another circle beginning, another connection forming. Hope skipped ahead toward the car, then stopped suddenly, pointing at the sky. "Look, stars!" They all looked up. The night was unusually clear for the city, stars pricking through the darkness like tiny holes in a black blanket. "Do you know their names?" Hope asked Andre. "Some of them," he replied, remembering nights with his grandmother on their small apartment balcony. "That bright one there is the North Star. People have used it to find their way home for thousands of years." Hope considered this seriously. "Is that how you found us, by following a star?" The innocent question caught Andre off guard. He exchanged a glance with Thomas and Eliza. "In a way," he said finally. "Not that star specifically, but by following a kind of light through the darkness." Hope nodded, satisfied with this answer, in the way that children often are with half-understood truths. "I'm glad you found us," she declared, slipping her small hand into his. "Me too, Hope. Me too." The ice cream shop was nearly empty when they arrived. Hope deliberated with great seriousness between flavors before choosing chocolate chip with extra sprinkles. As they sat at a small table, she peppered Andre with questions about his upcoming graduation ceremony. Would there be music? Would he wear a funny hat? Could she bring her new puppy? Watching her animated face, Andre marveled at how completely she had accepted him as family from the beginning. To Hope, there was nothing unusual about their connection. No artificial barriers. Just people who loved each other. His phone buzzed. A text from Lee with a photo of a smiling young man holding keys to a new apartment. Another success story, Another life-changing direction. Everything okay? Thomas asked. Andre showed him the photo. More than okay. Remember Jason from the West Side shelter? He just moved into his own place today. Thomas smiled. That's the third one this month. Fourth, Eliza corrected. Trisha got her apartment last week. Hope looked up from her ice cream, rainbow sprinkles dotting her chin. Can we visit Jason? I could make him a plant like I did for Trisha. The 6-year-old had appointed herself welcome committee for everyone in their program, insisting on delivering small potted plants she helped grow to each person who moved into a new home. I'm sure he'd love that, Andre assured her. As they finished their ice cream, a light rain began to fall outside, a gentle spring shower that made the city streets gleam under the streetlights. We should get Hope home to bed, Eliza said, checking her watch. Big day tomorrow with the Foundation's anniversary celebration. Andre nodded but found himself staring out at the rain, momentarily lost in memory. Penny for your thoughts? Thomas asked quietly. I was just thinking about that night, Andre replied. How close I came to not stopping. How easy it would have been to keep walking and stay invisible. Thomas followed his gaze to the rainy street. I think about that too, about all the threads that had to connect just right for our paths to cross. If Eliza had taken another route, if you'd chosen another shelter that night, if I hadn't run out of gas, Eliza added with a laugh. I was so mad at myself for forgetting to fill the tank. Hope, listening intently despite her drooping eyelids, asked, what would have happened if you didn't meet? The adults exchanged glances, each considering how different their lives would be. I think, Andre said slowly, we would all have been a little less complete, a little less connected to what matters most. Outside, the rain continued to fall, gently, washing the city clean. As they walked to the car, Hope splashed in puddles despite her mother's protests, her laughter echoing in the quiet street. Andre watched this little family that had somehow become his own, thinking about all that, had grown from one moment of simple human kindness. The thousands of lives changed through their foundation, the policies transformed, the bridges built between worlds that rarely connected, and yet for all the scale and impact of their work, it always came back to this. Individual lives intersecting, people seeing each other clearly, choosing connection over separation. In the morning, he would stand before cameras and reporters at the Foundation's 5-year celebration. He would share statistics and success stories. He would talk about systems change and policy reform. But tonight, walking through gentle rain with Hope's small hand in his, Andre understood that the real miracle wasn't in the headlines or awards. It was in the countless invisible threads that connect human beings to one another, threads that had always been there waiting to be acknowledged. Race you to the car, Hope suddenly declared, breaking free and dashing ahead. Andre caught Thomas's eye, and without a word, both men took off after her, all three of them laughing as they ran through the rain, 3 lives that should never have connected, now inseparable. Behind them, Eliza shook her head fondly and opened her umbrella, walking at her own pace through the gentle shower that, like that long-ago downpour, continued to nourish seeds of change planted years before, growing into something beautiful none of them could have imagined alone. 10 years had passed since the rainy night that changed everything. Andre watched from the wings of the stage as Hope, now 11 years old and impossibly poised, introduced him to the packed auditorium. My Uncle Andre isn't really my uncle by blood, she was saying, her voice clear and confident. He's my uncle, because he saved my mom's life before I was even born. He's my uncle because love makes families, not just DNA. A decade. Sometimes it felt like yesterday that Andre had been that scared, hungry teenager huddled under an awning. Other times that life seemed to belong to someone else entirely. He doesn't like it when people call him a hero, Hope continued with a mischievous smile. He says he just did what anyone would do, but that's not true. We know that now. Most people walked past my mom that night. Only Andre stopped. The crowd listened intently. This was the 10th anniversary celebration of their foundation, now operating in 38 cities with a staff of over 200 people. many of whom had once been recipients of their services. My dad says Uncle Andre taught our family the most important lesson, that the walls between people aren't real. They're just things we build in our minds. Hope's smile widened. I think that's why our foundation is called No Walls, because once you see past them, you can never go back to pretending they're real. She gestured toward the wings. Please welcome my Uncle Andre Tyler, Executive Director of the No Walls Foundation and the best bedtime story reader in the world. The crowd rose to their feet as Andre walked onto the stage, hugging Hope before she bounced back to her seat between Thomas and Eliza in the front row. At 32, Andre carried himself, with quiet confidence, though public speaking still made his heart race. Thank you, Hope, he began. I'm not sure about being the best bedtime story reader, but I do have a lot of practice since someone always wants just one more story every night. Laughter rippled through the audience as Hope gave an exaggerated shrug of innocence. 10 years ago, Andre continued, I was just trying to survive. Today we're changing how our country addresses homelessness, poverty, and the artificial barriers that keep people trapped in cycles of need. Behind him, a screen displayed images from their decade of work, shelter openings, policy meetings, success stories, families reunited, dreams realized. The numbers are impressive, he acknowledged. Over 30,000 people housed, 15,000 back in school, 22,000 connected with stable employment. But numbers don't tell the real story. He clicked to a new slide, a simple photograph of hands clasped together, forming an unbroken circle. Young hands, old hands, hands of every color. The real story is connection. The real story is what happens when we stop seeing each other as categories, homeless, wealthy, at risk, privileged, and start seeing each other as humans with shared needs for dignity, purpose, and belonging. As Andre spoke about their work, he spotted familiar faces throughout the audience. Deshaun, now regional director for their West Coast programs. Lee, who had completed his social work degree and ran their largest youth shelter. Tasha from the catering staff years ago, now finishing medical school with plans to work in community health. And in the back, a surprise, Mr. Wilson, his middle school teacher, now elderly but beaming with pride. Our approach is different, Andre explained. We don't just offer services, we transform systems. We don't just provide charity. We create pathways to self-sufficiency. And most importantly, we don't separate givers from receivers. Everyone has something to contribute, and everyone has something to learn. He shared stories of unlikely connections formed through their programs, a former bank executive who now taught financial literacy in shelters, a teenager who had lived in a car with her mother, now developing affordable housing plans, a retired judge who had mentored formerly incarcerated youth and ended up changing his own views on the justice system. These connections, Andre emphasized, are where the real magic happens. When worlds that rarely intersect begin to overlap, we all become more fully human. After his speech came the awards portion of the evening, recognition for major donors, dedicated staff, and program graduates who had gone on to remarkable achievements. Hope joined Andre on stage again to present the final award, created in her name, the Hope Award for Courage and Connection. This year's recipient was a 12-year-old boy who had started a buddy program pairing homeless youth with students at his school. Sometimes kids can see things more clearly than grown-ups, Hope said as she handed him the award. We haven't learned all the reasons why we're supposed to stay separated yet. The wisdom from this child who had grown up understanding connection as her birthright brought tears to many eyes, including Andre's. Later, at the reception, Andre found himself approached by a distinguished-looking woman he didn't recognize. Mr. Tyler, she said warmly. I was hoping to speak with you. Just Andre, please. He extended his hand. I'm Patricia Winters, from the President's Council on Community Solutions, she explained. Your work has caught our attention. We'd like to scale your model nationally with federal backing. Andre blinked in surprise. They'd been working toward federal adoption for years, but progress had been painfully slow. What changed? He asked. Patricia smiled. The data, for one thing. Your outcomes are undeniable, but honestly, it was the documentary update released last month. seeing 10 years of transformation, hearing from people whose lives have been completely redirected. It's powerful. The president watched it and called me the next day. Before Andre could respond, he felt a tug on his sleeve. Hope stood there, trying to look patient but practically vibrating with excitement. "Uncle Andre, Dad says it's time for the surprise." He glanced at Patricia. "I'm sorry. Could we continue this conversation in a moment?" "Of course," she replied, clearly amused by Hope's enthusiasm. "Family comes first. That's part of what makes your model so effective." Hope pulled Andre through the crowd to where Thomas and Eliza waited near a side door. Over the years they had become true family, not just benefactors or friends, but the people he called first with good news, bad news, or no news at all. "What's this surprise?" Andre asked, suspicious of the matching grins on all three faces. "Come and see," Thomas said, opening the door that led to a smaller meeting room. Inside, Andre froze. The room was filled with people from every chapter of his life: his former foster parents, now elderly but smiling nervously; 3 foster siblings he had lost touch with years ago; his grandmother's best friend from church; neighbors from his childhood building, even his first-grade teacher. "We found them," Eliza said softly. "All the people who were part of your journey, who helped shape you before we ever met you." "They all wanted to come," Thomas added, "to see the man you've become." Andre stood speechless as Hope nudged him forward. "It's okay," she whispered. "I was scared too when I did my first piano recital, but you told me it's okay to be scared and brave at the same time." Drawing strength from her words, Andre moved into the room. One by one, he embraced people he had thought lost to him forever. His foster mother wept as she told him how often she had thought of him, how guilty she had felt for failing him. "You didn't fail me," Andre assured her. "We were all caught in broken systems. That's what we're fixing now." His foster brother Juan, now with children of his own, showed Andre family photos. "Your grandmother visits me in my dreams sometimes," he said. "Tells me you're doing important work. I always knew you would." For hours, Andre moved through the room, reconnecting pieces of his past, filling in blanks in his story. Hope stayed by his side, soaking in these new dimensions of her beloved uncle, asking questions that only a child would think to ask. Did Andre like peanut butter sandwiches when he was my age too? Was he always so serious about homework? Did he tell bedtime stories back then? Later, as the night wound down, Andre found himself on the building's rooftop terrace with Thomas, Eliza, and Hope. Below them stretched the city, the same city where they had met, now transformed in countless ways by their work together. "Thank you for tonight," Andre said simply. "For everything." Thomas shook his head. "We should be thanking you. Our lives were comfortable before, but they weren't meaningful in the same way." "Hope wouldn't be who she is without you in her life," Eliza added. "None of us would." Hope, leaning against the railing and looking out at the city lights, said suddenly, "I've been thinking." The adults exchanged amused glances. Hope's "I've been thinking" moments were legendary for launching new initiatives. "About what, sweetheart?" Eliza asked. "About what comes next," Hope replied with the seriousness only an 11-year-old could muster. "We've done a lot in 10 years, but there's still people who need help, still walls that need to come down." Andre moved to stand beside her. "What do you think should come next?" Hope looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "I think we need to go bigger. Not just cities, whole countries, the whole world maybe." Thomas chuckled. Ambitious as always. But Hope wasn't joking. "That lady was from the president, right? That means the whole country could do what we're doing, and then maybe other countries would see and do it too." Andre considered the child's vision. It wasn't actually that different from what Patricia Winters had been suggesting, taking their model to a national scale. "You might be onto something," he told Hope. "Big changes start with big dreams." "And with one person stopping to help," she added, echoing the phrase she had heard all her life, the foundation of their shared story. A light rain began to fall, soft drops catching the colored lights from below. None of them moved to go inside. Did you ever imagine this? Andre asked Thomas and Eliza. That night in the rain, did you ever think it would lead here? Thomas shook his head. I was just grateful you got Eliza to the hospital safely. Everything else has been beyond imagination. Eliza took Andre's hand. But that's how the best stories unfold, isn't it? Not from grand plans, but from small moments of humanity that grow into something larger than ourselves. Hope, who had been listening intently, nodded in agreement. Like when a seed turns into a whole forest. Exactly like that. Andre smiled. As they stood together in the gentle rain, Andre thought about cycles and circles again, how what had once been his greatest hardship had become his greatest purpose, how strangers had become family, how one moment of connection had rippled outward, touching thousands of lives and reshaping systems that had seemed unmovable. The rain fell harder now, but none of them moved. There was something fitting about standing in the rain together, a decade after the downpour that had first connected their lives. I think, Hope announced, tilting her face up to the rain, this is the beginning of the next chapter. And looking at this remarkable child, born of crisis, raised in connection, now dreaming of changing the world, Andre knew she was right. This was no ending. This was just the beginning of what was possible when the walls came down, when human beings truly saw each other, when hope was not just a child's name but a way of moving through the world. The rain continued to fall, washing away what was finished, nourishing what was yet to grow.